I paid $35 for a cardboard box. That's it. $35 at an estate sale on a Saturday morning in October, the kind of gray, drizzly day in Kelowna where the mountains disappear behind clouds and the whole world feels smaller than it should. I almost didn't go. My daughter had called the night before asking me to babysit, and for about 20 minutes I genuinely considered just staying home in my pajamas with a cup of tea and a book I'd been meaning to finish since August. But something made me go. I've thought about that a lot since. The sale was at a house on Lakeshore Road, one of those big older properties with a wraparound porch, and a garden that had clearly been beautiful once before whoever had been tending it stopped being able to. There were maybe 40 people milling around when I arrived, picking through furniture and dishes and the accumulated weight of someone's entire life, all of it tagged with little orange stickers. I'm not a regular estate sale person. I'd only gone because my friend Diane had sent me the listing and said they sometimes had vintage sewing patterns, and I'd been looking for a specific one for months. I didn't find the pattern. What I found instead was a cardboard box near the back of the garage, partially hidden under a folding table. It was sealed with packing tape that had gone brittle and yellow with age, and someone had written on the side in black marker, "Misk Office." Not exactly a thrilling description. But the box felt heavier than it looked when I nudged it with my foot, and the woman running the sale, a tired-looking woman in her 50s who introduced herself as the estate executor, told me everything in the garage was $35 flat. Take what you want. I carried it to my car without opening it. I told myself I'd look through it at home, where I had more room. Honestly, I think I was just tired and cold and ready to leave. I drove back to my apartment in Pandosi Village, made myself a proper lunch, and didn't touch the box until almost 3 in the afternoon. When I finally cut through the tape and folded back the flaps, I found exactly what the label promised: Office Miscellany. A broken stapler, a stack of manila folders held together with a dried-out elastic band that snapped the moment I touched it, 3 dried-up pens, a glass paperweight shaped like a maple leaf, some old BC Hydro statements from 2009. I was about to tape it all back up and put it in the recycling when I noticed the folders weren't entirely empty. There was one at the bottom, slightly thicker than the others, with a strip of masking tape across the tab. Someone had written on the tape in pencil, faded but legible, "For the right person. You'll know if it's you." I sat down on my kitchen floor. I don't know why I sat down. There was a perfectly good chair 2 feet away. But I sat down on the cold tile and held that folder in my hands for a long moment before I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter on cream-colored stationery, 3 pages, dated March 14, 2019. Clipped to the letter was a key, small brass, the kind that fits a safety deposit box, and underneath the letter, in a sealed envelope marked Bank of Montreal, Orchard Park Branch, was a document I didn't understand at first, a letter of instruction, a name, an account number, and a balance. The balance was $412,000. I read the number 3 times. Then I read it again. Then I set the folder down on the tile beside me and pressed both hands flat against the floor because the room had started to feel slightly unreal. The handwritten letter was from a woman named Harriet Voss. I didn't know her. I'd never heard that name in my life. But by the time I'd finished reading all 3 pages, I felt like I'd known her for years, and I understood, in a way that was both heartbreaking and quietly extraordinary, exactly why she had done what she had done. Harriet Voss had been a retired school teacher. She'd spent 31 years teaching grade 4 at an elementary school in Summerland, which is a small town about 40 minutes south of Kelowna. She'd never married. She had one son, a man named Derek Voss, who was in his early 50s and lived in Calgary. In her letter, Harriet described the last decade of her relationship with Derek with a careful, almost clinical precision that made it worse somehow, like she'd gone over it so many times she'd learned to write about it without crying. Derek had borrowed money from her 6 times over 10 years. Small amounts at first, $2,000 for a car repair, $5,000 for a business idea that went nowhere, then larger again. When Harriet was diagnosed with the early stages of Parkinson's in 2017, Derek had come to stay with her for a month, and during that month he had convinced her to give him power of attorney, telling her it was just practical, just in case she needed someone she could trust to manage things if she couldn't. She had trusted him. She signed. Within 18 months, Derek had quietly liquidated her RRSP, sold a piece of land she'd inherited from her own mother, and transferred most of what he'd taken into his own accounts in Alberta. When Harriet realized what had happened, when a bank employee named Sandra Chow called her at home to verify a transaction she hadn't authorized, she had called a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Patricia Alderton, and she had an office on Water Street in Kelowna. Patricia Alderton had helped Harriet do 2 things. First, she helped her revoke the power of attorney and report Derek to the public guardian and trustee of British Columbia. Second, and this is the part I still have trouble fully processing, she helped Harriet take the money she had left. The savings Derek hadn't found, kept in a separate account at a separate bank, opened quietly and in cash, the way you'd do it if you were afraid someone was watching, and turn it into something Derek could never reach. The letter of instruction in the sealed envelope was legal. Patricia Alderton had structured it carefully. The money wasn't a will bequest. It would have gone through probate, and Derek would have challenged it. Instead, it was held in trust with specific terms. It would pass to the first person who came into lawful possession of the key and presented it to the branch, accompanied by the letter of instruction, within 90 days of Harriet's death. The estate executor had been instructed to include the folder in the estate sale items, sealed, without explanation. Harriet had written, "I don't know who you are. I hope you needed this. I spent a long time being afraid of my own son, and I decided that the money I had left shouldn't go to him, and it shouldn't go to lawyers, and it shouldn't sit in an account earning interest for nobody. It should go to a stranger who picked up a box and got curious. I hope you're kind. I hope this changes something for you. HV." I sat on my kitchen floor for a very long time. Then I did what I think anyone would do, or at least what I hope they'd do. I called a lawyer. Her name was Janet Kowalski, and a friend had used her years ago for a real estate matter, and said she was sharp and no nonsense and didn't charge you for 3 hours when the answer took 20 minutes. I found her number, left a message, and she called me back within the hour. I explained the situation as clearly as I could, which wasn't very clearly at all, because my voice kept doing something strange when I talked about Harriet's letter. Janet told me to bring everything in: the folder, the letter, the key, the sealed bank envelope, without touching anything else and without telling anyone what I'd found until we'd had a chance to review it together. She said those exact words, without telling anyone. I asked her if that included my daughter. She paused. "For now," she said. "Yes." I put the folder in a Ziploc bag, which I realize in retrospect was probably unnecessary, but it made me feel better, like I was preserving something. I put the Ziploc bag in my work bag, and then I sat in my apartment for the rest of the evening, not watching television, not reading, not doing anything useful, just thinking about Harriet Voss and a man named Derek and 31 years of teaching grade 4 in Summerland. I met with Janet Kowalski 2 days later at her office on Bernard Avenue. She was a small woman in her early 60s with reading glasses on a beaded chain and the kind of calm, measured voice that probably cost her clients a lot of anxiety because it never revealed what she was thinking. She read through everything twice. She asked me a series of very precise questions. How had I come to be at the estate sale? Had I met the executor before? Did I have any prior connection to Harriet Voss or her family? Had I shared the contents of the folder with anyone? No. She set the folder down and looked at me over her glasses. The structure is unusual, she said, but it's not without precedent, and Patricia Alderton is a very good lawyer. If she set this up, she set it up correctly. So it's real, I said. I'd like to speak with Ms. Alderton directly before I tell you anything definitive, Janet said. But yes, my initial reading is that this is real. I drove home in a daze and sat in the parking lot of my building for 15 minutes before going inside. Janet called Patricia Alderton the next morning. They spoke for almost an hour. Janet called me that afternoon and said she needed me to come in again. And this time she didn't sound quite as measured. Patricia Alderton confirmed everything. She had been Harriet's lawyer for the last 4 years of Harriet's life. She had structured the trust herself. She had advised the estate executor, a woman named Ruth Halverson, a former colleague of Harriet's from Summerland Elementary, on exactly what to do with the box and the folder. Ruth Halverson had followed the instructions to the letter. Everything was legitimate. Everything was documented. The 90-day window had opened the day Harriet died, which had been September 22nd. I had bought the box on October 12th. I had 21 days left. Janet and I went to the Bank of Montreal branch at Orchard Park together on a Thursday morning. I brought the key, the letter, the document, my ID, and what I can only describe as the specific feeling of being in a situation that cannot possibly be happening to you, but very much is. We sat across from a branch manager named Kevin Park, who read through everything twice. Everyone seemed to be reading things twice at that point, which I found oddly reassuring, and then excused himself for 20 minutes to make phone calls I couldn't hear. When he came back, he had a form for me to sign. I won't pretend I wasn't terrified to sign it, not because I thought anything was wrong, but because signing it made it real, and real things can go wrong in ways that imaginary things can't. But I signed it, and Kevin Park shook my hand across the desk and said, with admirable professionalism, "Congratulations, Ms." And then my last name, which I won't write here, and that was that. $412,000. I called my daughter from the parking lot. Her name is Megan, and she is 28 years old and has her father's stubbornness and my terrible habit of catastrophizing small problems, and I love her completely. She was quiet on the phone for so long that I thought the call had dropped. "Mum," she finally said. "I know. How? I know. A box. A box," I said. $35. She started laughing. I started crying. We did both of those things simultaneously over the phone in the parking lot of a Bank of Montreal in Kelowna, British Columbia, and several people walking by looked at me with concern. For about 3 days, everything was fine. Then Derek Voss called. I don't know how he found out. Patricia Alderton said later that the estate was required to notify next of kin at certain stages, and Derek was Harriet's only next of kin, and somewhere in the legal process a door had opened that shouldn't have opened all the way. He called me on a Tuesday evening, just after 7. I didn't recognize the number, Alberta area code, and I almost let it go to voicemail. I wish I had let it go to voicemail. Is this the woman who bought the box from my mother's estate? His voice was controlled, very controlled. The kind of controlled that tells you someone is working hard at it. Who is this? I said. He told me his name. He said he was Harriet Voss's son. He said there had been a misunderstanding about some of his mother's assets, and he wanted to discuss it, and he was hoping we could resolve things quietly without involving more lawyers. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was standing in my kitchen, and I was looking at the place on the tile floor where I had sat when I first read Harriet's letter, and I was thinking about 31 years in a grade 4 classroom, and a woman who had been afraid of her own son for a decade, and who had spent the last years of her life building something he couldn't take. I think you should speak to my lawyer, I said. I don't think this needs to go that far, he said. He had a particular quality in his voice then. Not threatening exactly, but edged, certain. This is a family matter. My mother was not well when she made certain decisions. I think if you understood the full picture, you should speak to my lawyer, I said again. And I gave him Janet Kowalski's number, and I hung up. My hands were shaking when I put the phone down. I don't think I ate dinner that night. I called Janet instead and told her about the call, and she told me I had done exactly the right thing, and that I should not speak to Derek Voss again under any circumstances, and that she would be handling all further contact. He called 2 more times that week. I didn't answer either time. He left one voicemail, which I forwarded to Janet without listening to it more than once. In it, he said his mother had not been of sound mind in her final years. He said the structure of the trust was being looked at by his own legal team. He said he was sure we could come to an understanding. Janet was not interested in coming to an understanding. What Derek didn't know, what I suspect he'd never thought to find out, because men like Derek don't tend to imagine their mothers doing things quietly, and on purpose, was that Patricia Alderton had been extremely thorough. Harriet had undergone 2 independent cognitive assessments in 2021 and 2022, both of which documented her as fully competent. The trust had been witnessed and notarized with full disclosure of Harriet's intent and circumstances, and Patricia had kept copies of everything, including the original complaint to the public guardian and trustee about Derek's misuse of the power of attorney, which had resulted in a formal finding against him that was a matter of public record. Derek's legal team, it turned out, didn't have much to work with. Janet called me on a Friday afternoon, 6 weeks after I'd first found the folder, to tell me that Derek's lawyer, a man named Brian Chu, apparently had indicated his client would not be pursuing the matter further. She used her careful, measured voice, but I could hear something underneath it, something that sounded almost like satisfaction. "That's it," I said. "That's it," she said. I made myself a cup of tea and stood at my kitchen window, looking out at the lake. It was November by then, properly cold, the kind of cold that settles into Kelowna in a way the mild autumn never quite prepares you for. The mountains were out again, clear and sharp and enormous. I thought about Harriet Voss standing at a window somewhere, maybe in Summerland, maybe looking at the same mountains, or the same lake, or a different view entirely, a view from a house I'd never seen, belonging to a life I only knew from 3 pages of careful, heartbroken handwriting on cream stationery. I thought about her going to Patricia Alderton's office and sitting across a desk and saying, in whatever words she'd used, "I want to make sure he doesn't get it. I want it to go somewhere else. I want it to matter." I thought about her teaching 31 years of 9-year-olds how to read and write and add and take care of each other, and I thought about what it must have cost her to be afraid of the person she'd raised, and I thought about the particular kind of courage it takes to be 81 years old and sick, and still decide that things can be done differently than they've always been done. She never met me. She never knew my name. She had no way of knowing I'd be the one to pick up that box, or that I'd be curious enough to read what was inside, or that I'd call a lawyer instead of panicking or giving up or deciding it was too complicated and walking away. She'd set up the whole thing on a kind of faith in a stranger she'd never get to meet. That's the part that stays with me. I used some of the money to pay off what was left of my car loan, which sounds deeply anticlimactic, and I'm aware of that. I put a significant portion into a TFSA because I'm 51 years old, and I haven't saved nearly enough for retirement, and Janet told me to. I set some aside for Megan. Not a lot, because I didn't want it to be a thing between us, just enough to help with the down payment she's been quietly saving for since last year. And I donated $15,000 to a legal aid organization in Kelowna that helps elderly people in situations of financial abuse. Janet found it for me. They do the kind of work Patricia Alderton had done for Harriet, helping people understand what's been taken from them and what they're still allowed to want. I put the donation in Harriet's name. I thought about writing a letter to Patricia Alderton, explaining what I'd done with it, asking her to keep it on file somewhere. I thought about whether there was any world in which knowing what happened would reach Derek Voss. Not to taunt him, genuinely not, but because there's something I wanted him to understand that I couldn't quite articulate. That his mother hadn't just kept money from him. She'd turned it into something. She'd made it into an act. She'd refused to let it be just an inheritance squabbled over by lawyers, and instead made it into a decision, a hand extended to someone she'd never see. A trust placed in the hands of a stranger on a rainy Saturday in October. She'd made it matter in a way that had nothing to do with him at all. I still have the paperweight, the glass one, shaped like a maple leaf, that was in the bottom of the box with the broken stapler and the dried-up pens. I kept it, I'm not sure why exactly. It sits on my desk now, and it's not beautiful in any particular way. The glass is slightly yellowed, and there are tiny bubbles trapped in it. But I look at it sometimes when I'm working, and I think about Harriet, and about the fact that something as ordinary as a Saturday morning and a cardboard box and $35 can turn into the most extraordinary thing that's ever happened to you if you just decide to be a little bit curious about what's inside.